Hello, everybody. It is Wednesday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, assistant sports editor for multimedia at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, joined for our weekly Penn State football podcast by Isaiah Maldonado, our Post-Gazette and daily collegiate Nittany Lions insider. Isaiah, a lot to talk about this week. Definitely teams in the Penn State fan base after a somewhat tepid but yet big victory Saturday against FIU. So we're going to dig into the pluses of that win, the minuses, and look ahead to what Penn State can do against Villanova to mollify some of these fears at the margins. Before we do, we want to thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast. It's FanDuel. They are the Nittany Lions are plus 600 co-favorites for the national title over at FanDuel right now. So check them out if you'd like the Nittany Lions at that price, sharing the top spot with Ohio State at the moment, just like they are in the Associated Press poll. So check out FanDuel if you're looking for any action on the Nittany Lions. Isaiah, let's get into it here with Drew Allar a little bit. The murmurs are starting. It was not his most efficient outing on Saturday, less than 60% completion percentage, 6.1 yards per attempt. He is not screaming first-round pick or Heisman candidate to a lot of people. There were drops. I think Penn State had 5 drops in this game that definitely could have changed his stat line in the end. But regardless, there's concern from some people. So are you concerned, especially against competition of this caliber, that he's not piling up the stats, not even looking? Yeah, I think about that West Virginia game, his first game as a starter a couple of years ago. He had everybody really excited. He's not doing that yet as a senior. Is that just a product of he had some drops, early season malaise, or is there a legitimate reason for concern here?
I don't really think there's too big of a reason for concern as of yet. I mean, like, if this is Drew Allar's low light for this year, I'd be perfectly okay with that. If this is the worst that we see him against FIU, and by all intents and purposes, he didn't have a bad game. He still 200 yards in the air, 2 touchdowns. Especially that touchdown to Devonte Ross was definitely something to be happy with. Continue to establish that relationship with receivers. But I do think that it is kind of just those early season jitters, if you want to call it that. I think the Nittany Lions have a lot of players in rotation. I think this is 2 games back-to-back where they've had over 70 players in. A lot of guys coming in and out is going to be kind of hard for Allar to find that connection with some of these guys who haven't been as solidified within the rotation as past years. So I think that as of right now, this is just something that we should be on mid to low alert, not high alert. This doesn't scream out that, oh, he's not going to be a first-round pick. I had my own concerns about whether I thought Allar was going to be able to live up to that. But in terms of right now, I wasn't upset with the way that he played. I think he was still able to make some big plays. He spoke about it post-game, saying that he was just in his own head. This was a Drew Allar versus Drew Allar kind of situation, out of Drew Allar versus the Panthers. And I do think that it was just a matter of you make one misplay, you get in your head about it. I would like to see a little bit more mental fortitude from a senior, somebody who is a Heisman hopeful, somebody who has the expectations of winning a national championship with this Penn State team. But I don't think that this is the end all be all for Allar.
I got to say, that's the part that I like a lot less than whatever the on-field results were or were not. It was, him being asked after the game, where his mindset is, and him saying he was overthinking things. And yep. James Franklin on Monday saying that, Drew Allar needs to be able to flush things faster. And that's more concerning to me. Why are we still having this conversation about a senior quarterback, a guy who's played, he's not a 3-year starter, but he did play a lot in that first season when Sean Clifford was ostensibly the starter. They found opportunities for him. So it's not as if he's only played for the last 2 years. He's got a lot of experience. That does concern me. That's what's being said about, playing against FIU and not so much 19-33 for 200 yards and 2 touchdowns. That, can just be, I can write that off as exactly all the stuff you're saying. But when you're talking like that, and when we've seen Drew Allar come up short in these big games, I think it's fair for people to ask questions.
For sure. I mean, we saw he's never been somebody to not take responsibility for his own actions. But at what point do we learn from these mistakes and especially not make them against lower caliber opponents? Because when we get into a point where we're going to play a team like Oregon, when Penn State is going to play a team like Ohio State, those split seconds of decision making, those split seconds of thinking about the last play and what you could have done to make it better, those are going to make all the difference in terms of how much time he has to get the ball out and just how much time he has to make his reads and his progression. So once again, that mental fortitude aspect is a little bit concerning. I would hopefully like to attribute it to the fact that this is such a new team for him. But in terms of you're that figurehead, you need to be the guy who is always put together for this offense no matter what. If you're the one that is losing confidence or you're the one that's wavering, the whole offense is going to fluctuate.
Yeah, and I think, listen, I've been one of the bigger Drew Allar backers, especially this summer when there have not been a whole lot of them. I've had a level of belief in him, and that a lot of the issues we saw with that offense late last season were related to not having the weapons. But ostensibly, he should have the weapons now, and it's a matter of utilizing them as best he can, and he needs to get that stuff figured out. Let's talk a little bit about those receivers. The 5 drops. I think even more concerning than that was just, again, guys kind of being invisible in this offense to some degree. I think other than the long touchdown to Devonte Ross, which, I mean, you can't completely take that out of the conversation.
For sure.
It was sweet. It was awesome. But otherwise, no Penn State receiver would have had more than 40 yards in this game against an overmatched opponent. Is there any level of concern about those guys, figuring things out and once you get into the conference schedule, can they be the assets Penn State has been lacking the last couple of years, who are going to be consistent, who are going to be there for Drew Allar when he needs them? I'm not overreacting to one game, but you never like it when they become somewhat invisible again.
I mean, yeah, like in terms of being able to have viable production from those receiver slots, especially in a game like this, and I will give props to FIU, because we knew that their passing defense was a little bit stronger than their rushing defense. I expected our front four, Penn State's front four, to really kind of put a lot of pressure on Jenkins, and that's exactly what happened. But they were pretty solid in the pass defense for the majority of the game. So I will give them a little bit of props there. But in terms of just getting that production out of them consistently, I think is going to be something that's really big going forward. I know that James Franklin spoke post-game about, seeing what we saw from Devonte Ross, and that was something that they wanted to see. They knew what he could do in camp. They knew what he had been doing kind of this entire buildup, even with those bumps and bruises. So getting a good game under his belt before conference play was something that they were really hoping for. And then obviously what we saw from Pena and Hudson in game 1 against Nevada, we've seen every receiver have a good game so far within these first 2 games, at least out of the transfers. So going forward with that, I'm hoping that now that kind of we're heading into week 3, those early season jitters have to be out the way. After Villanova, after the bye, we approach Oregon. Everybody needs to be in that we're ready for it mindset. So I'm hoping that with Ross's performance and that, highlight play, that big catch, reeled it in man coverage, I'm hoping that everybody's a little bit more solidified within their role. I know we're not going to get a game where all 3 of them are over 100 receiving yards. Most likely we're not going to. But if we could at least have one of them have a standout game every single game, and then the other 2 are good supporters picking up those first downs, making an individual great play, I think that's what I'm more so looking for, as opposed to seeing all of them dominate at the exact same time. I think by that, and some of them are naturally going to have lesser games, but to your point, they should never be that invisible. Like Pena, only 2 catches, 32 yards in those 2 catches, so not bad in terms of yards after the catch and yards per reception, but definitely want to see you a little bit more involved in the offense.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned it well. Listen, the explosive plays, the deep plays are great. They need to have those to have a chance to win the national championship. But I don't know that that's consistently always been the problem with this passing game either. I think it's been a lot of 3rd and 7s that these guys just haven't shown up for. And I need to see those guys do it on a down-to-down basis. And it's, I'd rather see them have, not all the time, but you'd like to see a guy say, okay, I'm going to put up 9 catches for 70 yards, where I know you're moving the chains with some consistency, rather than like, okay, you put up 120 yards like Trey Wallace did against West Virginia last year, but how much of that came on 1 play or 2 plays? I want to see more down-to-down consistency from these receivers this week against Villanova, and then especially once you get into that game against Oregon in a few weeks. Isaiah, the one unqualified success they had in the passing game this week was Luke Reynolds. There's big expectations for him, both given his pedigree as a former 5-star and Tyler Warren's efforts last year. Do you think we see games like this from him in conference play where he's piling up those, 8 catches for 70 yards, 80 yards stat lines we were just talking about with the receivers? Is he capable of that? Can he be capable of more at this stage of his career? Can he dominate games the way we saw Tyler Warren do last year? What's the ceiling for this guy in 2025?
I mean, I really don't know what his ceiling is, but I think it's high, man. Just from everything that I've seen from him thus far, even as a freshman, obviously when Rapierre went down with that injury, and we got to see a little bit of Luke Reynolds, and even James Franklin attributes, he said we wouldn't have seen Luke Reynolds yet and what he was capable of doing had that injury not happened. So to see what he did against Minnesota, 4th down, that 32-yard run to inevitably lead Penn State and get them in the position to win 26-5. His first touchdown against Purdue, we got to see glimpses of him and just the work that he's put in this offseason. Like James Franklin, talking about those big plays, just attributes to Luke Reynolds that he's one of those guys who can go out there, be physical, dominate, get yards after the catch, and that's going to be the pivotal point for Penn State. I do agree that those chunk plays haven't always been Penn State's problem, but he had 24 yards after the catch. He was able to show off what he could do, making guys miss, being physical, continuing to get the ball up the field. It was a really good look, and he looked comfortable with Allar, and I think that was something that was really important because obviously Dinkins was the first tight end to get into the end zone for Penn State, but he only had 1 reception. I believe he had 4 or 5 targets. So that connection, for whatever reason, wasn't too prominent there. And Luke Reynolds finished with more snaps, more downs played than Khalil Dinkins. They ended up kind of pivoting, who they wanted at that tight end spot against FIU. And where Dinkins was struggling to pick up those yards and connect with Allar, Reynolds looked like he fit perfectly into the offense. So I think going forward, there's definitely going to be a little bit more of a question of how we utilize him. Obviously, him and Rapierre were fighting for that tight end 2 spot. And I think that this performance really solidified him being that, that secondary tight end and a guy who can come in and be a reliable downfield target to pick up those first downs, but to also make that chunk play. So I think whatever his ceiling is, I'm not going to come out here and say that he's going to be Tyler Warren 2.0, but I do think that they can get some of the production that they lost with Tyler Warren going to the Colts. They can definitely get that back with Luke Reynolds.
Isaiah, how much is Penn State holding back? We haven't seen, I don't think, a ton of creativity from Andy Kotelnick quite yet. They have the advantage of playing these teams that they're 40-point plus favorites against every single week, then going into the bye week before you have to get Oregon at home. Do you think we've just not seen everything this offense has up its sleeve yet simply because they don't have to show it before they face Oregon?
I would like to think so. I think that, pulling all the stops out, showing everything that's in your bag against these opponents that realistically you don't have to do all of that for would kind of be to a disservice to them, to a negative to them. And we hearing James Franklin kind of talk about how as the season is going to progress, obviously the rotation is going to shorten. We're not going to be seeing 70 plus guys get into a game, and we're not going to see all of these guys get these reps in. Naturally, when we get into conference play, we're going to see those 40, 50 kind of rotations, 40, 50 player rotations where you are getting some secondary guys, and there's a lot of playmakers on both offense and defense. So you're naturally going to want to get them in. But I do think that in terms of right now, this is kind of like the test drive. I would like to think that this is them getting comfortable. This is them knowing what they're going up against and knowing that realistically, there's no way they lose unless they have a total collapse. Obviously, at the end of the day, with the offensive struggles of the Nittany Lions early on, the defense held FIU to 0 points. It was tremendous. They played phenomenal. So you kind of have that safety net, if you will, to ease into things a little bit more. And I would like to say that that's what I think this is, because I haven't really seen them with, all gas, no brakes.
Yeah, I think it stands to reason. Like you don't think Andy Kotelnick was pulling a bunch of things out of his bag as you got into early conference play last year. You think about the game at USC with the behind the line tight end pass, all that kind of stuff, the razzle dazzle. So I think there's probably some of that, and I think there's probably more conventional football that maybe they're not putting on tape as well, and tendencies they're trying to avoid putting out there that Oregon can possibly see. So I think you're probably trying to diversify things maybe more than you would like to in the early going. So Oregon doesn't have anything to key on. Isaiah, last thing on the offense here. Nice day on the ground for Kaytron Allen. Got 44 yards, average 9 per carry. Nick Singleton was averaging close to 6, but more volume for both of those guys than week one. I think those questions we had after week one, they seem ready to go.
Absolutely, and I think that's what we needed to see from them after the Nevada game. Obviously, 16 combined attempts for both of them against Nevada is not what we want to see. This is a team that has kind of built its offensive identity around being able to just like ram it down the middle and do what they have to do to move the ball up the field, kind of that gritty play style. And we didn't see enough of that against Nevada. And I get it. You're trying to establish this passing game. You want to show, especially these conference, these Big Ten opponents, that our passing game is a threat. Do not stack the box, because if you stack the box, you're going to regret it. But with that mentality, you still have to allow your running backs to eat. And I love what I saw. And I think, quite frankly, so did James Franklin. The tone of this season so far has been, let's establish these chunk plays. Let's keep maximizing this big play potential. And they were routinely able to break away in open space, break some tackles, be a physical force. Kaytron's longest rush was 67 yards. We saw that towards the end of the game. And I think they needed that. That was kind of their revitalization game, if you will, because I didn't want them heading into, even Villanova, which was going to be their last game before Oregon. I didn't want them heading into that game without having a tremendous effort under their belt. They can look at their performance against FIU and say, yeah, we combined for 209 rushing yards. And when we're at our best, every team has to watch out for us. Because even if their performances are so great that Oregon is going to stack the box or Ohio State is going to stack the box, then it's a matter of having that faith in the offensive unit. And once again, hoping that these new receivers are comfortable within the flow of the offense, aren't going to go invisible like you mentioned before. So I think that there's a lot more layers to Penn State's offense when their running game is on point like it was against FIU.
Chaz Coleman's the guy who has everyone talking on defense, had a huge game, a sack, 2 TFLs, fumble recovery, batted pass, a little bit of everything. Is it time for people to get excited about him, or do you need to see more of this against better teams?
I mean, I'm a firm believer of these big-time performances. Like, I need to see them from these lower caliber opponents. People are going to sit there and say, oh, he's overhyped if he didn't have this performance. But he was their highest graded PFF rated defender against FIU. I believe he had a 96.8 PFF grade. That is higher than any game and in any PFF ranking Abdul Carter had last year. Not to jump the gun and say that he's better than Abdul Carter, obviously, but to have that level of production in your second only career college game and to leave your marks everywhere, also had the pass deflection, to see a mixture of everything, the awareness of when he's on the field, that level of physicality. He put on 10, 11 pounds in the offseason to get up to, I believe, around 250. And he hasn't lost a step because of it. He's still the physical freak that he was beforehand, but he's still got the agility. He's still got the lateral quickness to beat guys off the line. And quite frankly, he's got the mind to match. Like, this is somebody who has the total package. And obviously, we're going to continue to build on a lot of these things. But I do think that he's going to become a pivotal piece for Penn State at that defensive end position even later in the year. Obviously, there's Darius Fisher kind of just got back. And to see him obviously ease into things coming off the injury that he had last year and then a couple of bumps and bruises and not being able to play and practice as much as he wanted to. I knew we weren't going to see him get too many moments in the game, but he looked comfortable in the time that he played. But I do think that when you have a playmaker like Chaz Coleman on the bench, you're going to do everything you can to possibly to get him in. So I do think that the hype is warranted. He's looked like a superstar.
I say I'll get you out of here on this. How worried should we start to be against Oregon? Because I watched them in that 3:30 game. I don't know if you got a chance to watch that game, but They got Whittington rolling downhill early. I was like, "Woo, they look good in the early going against Oklahoma State." And listen, Oklahoma State is the kind of ultimate portal team now. I'm not sure how much Mike Gundy has left in him. I'm not sure what that program is or isn't at this point in time. So I'm not overreacting to the opponent they beat. I just physically, they were very impressive on Saturday. Penn State still a 4.5-point favorite. According to our friends at FanDuel. I think that line got up to 6.5 at one point, Isaiah. It's dropping down a little bit. What are your thoughts on how Oregon has played in the early going, kind of asserting itself as, listen, we're going to be in this Big Ten race, even though some people have kind of counted them out of it and looked at Penn State and Ohio State as the front runners?
I mean, I think the biggest thing out of this Oregon game is the fact that they played over 80 players. They played, I believe it was 81 players. So it's not like they had their starters in this entire game and they were running up the clock and they were doing things to really establish their starters. No, they had the second, third, fourth unit come in and still be able to produce. So I think that this was a win. The 69-3 win is something that fans and people want to see from Penn State. Obviously, it's not a bad look to end up in the mid-30s, to end up in the low 40s. Those are successful days from the offense by all intents and means. But when you look at Oregon's game, I mean, every single play felt like a chunk play. If you look at the stats, not a single one of their rushers had double-digit attempts. The most was 9 from Hughes. They had 8.4 yards a carry. When you look at what Dante Moore did in the air, 16 for 21, just 266 yards, 3 passing touchdowns. And then you go to their receivers. Not a single one of these guys had over just 80 yards, but there was just so many of them moving the ball up the field. They averaged almost 18 yards a reception, just consistently able to make a big play. And they were consistent, routine chunk plays to get the team into the end zone. That's what we want to see from a team like Penn State that is trying to solidify this offense and really build up that new identity. Oregon looked like a complete team. And obviously, to your point, with Oklahoma State being one of the worst teams in the Big 12, you're not going to sit there and say, okay, it's so impressive that they did this against this team. It's the fact that they just look so comfortable, and every single player looked so comfortable. They were all ready for the moment. And pretty much anybody who checked in was ready and was able to contribute in some way, shape, or form. And it was 62-3 at the third quarter. We could have seen the potential for an 80-90 point game, and Oregon just said, let's be respectful and not run up the clock. Like, that's a really, really dominant win.
Yeah, and I guarantee you they're not talking about overthinking up in Eugene this week. So you want to see that from Penn State in this last game against Villanova, an FCS team still. So listen, it's ostensibly the least talented of the three they've played so far. You've got to see some dominance in this game, even though you've seen very good efforts the last couple of weeks. I just think that's my growing concern is Penn State just good? Is Penn State just the program it has been for the last handful of years, or is this team different? I think that's the question a lot of people are asking, and that's the scale that they're grading them on, and we have not seen them look different yet. And I think that's what people want to see going into Villanova. Isaiah, thank you for joining me, though. Always a great conversation. To everyone else, if you've just joined us for the first time this week, please subscribe to the channel. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Help us out in the YouTube algorithm. Isaiah will be back Saturday after Penn State Villanova at Beaver Stadium, so make sure you're checking in on his report, and we'll be back here next week breaking down the bye week with only 2 weeks to go till Oregon. Thanks for joining. We'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.